This is Route 66. 2,400 miles of highway cut across 8 American states. And nearly every town it brought to life is now either abandoned, half empty, or being torn apart by the same land it was built on. In the desert, heat alone is enough to split walls open and reduce entire structures to bone. In the mountains, the road climbs passes so deadly that locals named the stretch Bloody 66. And meant it. On the plains, tornadoes don't care what's still standing and what's already been left behind. Everything out here kept moving, except the people. And yet, entire towns are still out there. Buildings with doors still open. Everything exactly where it was the day the last person left, as if the whole world just stopped and no one remembered to come back for it. How any of it is still standing doesn't make sense. What's been hiding behind some of these doors is the part no one talks about. Until now. Along a sun-baked stretch of old highway in northern Arizona, there is a town that should have disappeared, but didn't because one man refused to let it. Seligman's story begins the moment Interstate 40 opened and pulled every passing car away so completely that businesses began shutting down like lights going out one by one. A barber watched the street fall silent from his shop window for decades, but instead of giving up, he rallied local business owners and helped launch the campaign that gave Route 66 historic status. From that effort, it became the birthplace of the entire Route 66 preservation movement. Today, the barbershop itself became a gift shop and small museum, its walls lined with memorabilia, old photographs and road maps. Elsewhere in town, old buildings still stand with their original facades and wide awnings once used to shade travellers stopping for gas and groceries. Among them are the old Seligman Sundry store, a pool hall, and a post office, most still wearing their one-storey parapets and canopy awnings. Eventually, word of this survival story reached Pixar, whose filmmakers travelled here and shaped the fictional town of Radiator Springs in cars. Seligman got its happy ending. Amboy, just down the road in the California desert, did not get the memo. It sits in the middle of the Mojave Desert. No shade, no neighbours, only a single highway cutting through open desert. Roy's Motel and Cafe was once the centre of it all. The owner built it almost entirely by hand, even hauling electrical poles across the desert to bring power to the site. At its peak, the town revolved around it. Gas pumps running, food cooking, and rooms filled with drivers too exhausted to continue. Then the interstate opened a few miles north, traffic vanished almost overnight, and eventually, one man bought the entire town outright because he genuinely didn't want it to disappear. He restored the boomerang neon sign, relit Roy's, and turned the property into a cafe roadside stop and film set, drawing crews, musicians, and photographers into the desert. From here, the highway continues east into Glenrio, a town so small it had to borrow space from 2 states just to exist. The state line runs straight through the middle of it, and locals learn to use it as a business strategy. All the bars sat on the New Mexico side because the neighbouring Texas county was completely dry, while the gas stations clustered in Texas, where fuel taxes were lower. An old motel sign still stands beside the road reading, "First in Texas, eastbound, and last in Texas, westbound." The same sign selling 2 different ideas depending on which way you're headed. Then Interstate 40 bypassed the town, and it collapsed with startling speed. Within only a few years, the population dropped from several hundred to nearly 0. Today, cracked pavement and fading storefronts make the place feel less abandoned than interrupted, as if everyone simply stepped away and never returned. The only business still operating is a cannabis dispensary on the New Mexico side. Somehow that feels exactly like the ending the town would have written for itself. Glenrio bent every rule it could find and still disappeared. Up ahead in the Arizona mountains, Oatman took a different approach, and somehow it worked. It clings high in the Black Mountains, wedged into a narrow canyon pass where early drivers crawled through hairpin turns in low gear, white-knuckling cliffs with nothing below them. During the gold rush, thousands packed the streets, and saloons ran non-stop as millions in gold were mined until the ore ran dry. The miners left, and the town faded away. Before leaving, miners released their pack burros into the hills, and their descendants still wander in each morning, stroll the boardwalks, and beg tourists for snacks. What ultimately saved Oatman was Route 66 itself, cutting straight through the canyon and forcing drivers crossing Arizona to slow down, stop for fuel, and stay longer than planned. The main street still runs along the original wooden boardwalks, lined with false front buildings that lean slightly with age. Inside the bar, thousands of signed dollar bills blanket the walls, while staged gunfights still erupt in the street twice a day. Texola, just over the Oklahoma border, never got the tourists, never got the revival, and never got the Burros. What it got was silence. Straddling the Oklahoma-Texas line, the town lived with a shifting boundary that never quite settled. Families could go to sleep in one state and wake up in another without moving an inch. At its peak, it functioned as a busy stop for westbound travellers, with gas stations, a cafe, a jail, and a water tower fueling drivers before they pushed into the Texas Panhandle. After the interstate arrived, Texola didn't fade slowly. It simply stopped, leaving storefronts, pumps, and signage exactly where they stood, as if the town had been paused midday. A small concrete jail still sits by the roadside, its single cell built with thick walls meant to prevent any escape. Unlike other preserved stops along the route, there's no restoration here, only exposed structures, peeling paint, and buildings left to the Oklahoma wind. If any ghost town on this road feels cursed, it's Two Guns, a crime scene, a zoo, a ruin, and a legend all stacked on top of each other. Beneath the old highway sits a canyon cave, where, according to local legend, Apache raiders were trapped inside and left to die. Years later, a roadside operator discovered the site and began charging tourists to climb down into the cave and view the scattered bones for themselves. He transformed the canyon into a full desert attraction, adding a gift shop, campground, fuel stop, mountain lion cages, and a small zoo built from local animals. For a time, the business even collected tolls from every car crossing the canyon bridge overhead, meaning Two Guns was literally making money from the road itself. But the place never stopped collapsing. Fires destroyed one complex, then another, and every attempt to revive the site eventually failed under a revolving chain of owners. The old stone zoo cages still stand open to the sky beside the canyon rim, while the cave entrance is still visible from the abandoned road above. East into New Mexico, the highway flattens and the air goes still. What's left of Quervo is out there somewhere. A church, a few walls, and a lot of wind. It began as a railroad settlement, a freight and cattle stop created because trains needed a place to pause and ranchers needed a place to ship. When cars replaced trains, Quervo adapted again, remaking itself as a service stop for Route 66 drivers crossing New Mexico's empty interior. Then the interstate arrived, ending that second chapter and leaving it among the few communities along Route 66 abandoned twice. The old church still stands with part of its roof collapsed and a wooden cross visible from the roadside, while wind drifts through the broken structure, as though the entire settlement was suspended halfway through falling apart. Not every town on this highway went completely quiet. Grande is still barely breathing, held together by faded diners, aging garages, and a narrow stretch of pavement. Long before Route 66 existed, this was already one of the Southwest's busiest corridors. The Mojave, Santa Fe, Mormon, and Spanish trails all cross this same stretch of desert. That overlap was no accident. The terrain naturally funnels movement here, so every generation of travellers, from wagon caravans to Model Ts, followed nearly the same path west. Once the highway arrived, cafes, repair shops and fuel stations appeared quickly to serve motorists emerging from the Mojave in need of gas, food, or a break from the heat. Many still stand beside the road, weathered storefronts, sagging roof lines and fading hand-painted signs under the California sun, neither restored nor fully abandoned. Just beyond town, it shifts into something unexpected. Not a ruin or roadside stop, but a forest of glass bottles rising out of the Mojave. A welder named Elmer Long began building what would become Bottle Tree Ranch, using objects he and his father had collected over decades. Typewriters, traffic signals, sewing machines, and even what looks like a bomb casing hang among the structures, scattered like fragments of another world. Meanwhile in Texas, a small panhandle town exists almost entirely because of a single line painted across the pavement. Right in the middle of Adrian, that line marks the exact midpoint of Route 66. 1,100 miles to Chicago in one direction, 1,100 miles to Los Angeles in the other. Beside it sits a cafe that has operated since the late 1920s, beginning as a single brick room with a dirt floor before slowly growing into one of the highway's most iconic stops. A woman named Fran took over the business, coined the slogan, "When you're here, you're halfway there," and transformed a small town diner into a nationally known landmark. Pixar later arrived during location scouting, met Fran, and eventually modelled Flo's V8 cafe in cars after the place. Around the edges of town, faded station buildings and empty service lots stand, cracked concrete aprons marking where fuel pumps once stood. Just past Flagstaff, at Twin Arrows, 2 wooden arrows the size of telephone poles stand in the dirt beside the old road, and the surrounding stretch has been empty for years. They weren't art or a monument, they were advertising, planted to pull drivers off the highway and into the trading post, cafe and gas station, sitting right behind them. It worked for decades, drawing westbound travellers who spotted the arrows from half a mile out and couldn't help but pull over for crafts, cold drinks and fuel. When the interstate bypassed the old road, the buildings were locked up and left exactly as they were. Cafe, gas station, motel, all of it just sitting there. The arrows became more famous after closing, turning up on postcards, road trip guides and photography accounts as one of the most recognisable images on the highway. Both are still standing, though one leans badly now, the wood splitting after years in the Arizona heat, held up mostly by dry air and the fact that nobody has gotten around to finishing it off. Northeast of here, in Missouri, someone took the idea of a ghost town and turned it completely inside out. Red Oak too isn't a place that died, it's a place rebuilt from memory. An artist named Lowell Davis watched his small hometown fade after the war, then spent decades doing something unusual, relocating historic buildings from across the region onto his own land, one structure at a time. A general store, blacksmith shop, one-room jail, chapel and vintage gas station all stand there. Not replicas, but original buildings restored and moved by hand. Antique cars rest in the streets, chickens drift between buildings, and metal horse sculptures stand in the fields, blurring the line between installation and settlement. Its result feels less like a museum and more like walking through someone else's preserved memory. The most personally constructed stop on this highway gives way westward to one of its oldest, Dagget, a town that survived silver booms, railroad years, and highway traffic. It started as a supply depot for silver miners pushing into the Mojave, a place where ore came out and everything needed to extract it went back in. The railroad arrived shortly after, turning it into one of the busiest freight stops in the desert, with depots, saloons, hotels, and wagon yards all running at once. Death Valley expeditions used it as their last resupply point before heading north, making this small desert town the final stop before one of the most dangerous environments in the region. When mining slowed, the railroad kept it alive. When automobiles took over, Route 66 did it again, each new era arriving just in time to keep the town from dying. The stone hotel, built in the mining days, still stands, thick-walled to block desert heat before air conditioning, now one of the oldest surviving buildings on this stretch of the Mojave. From the railroad depots and mining supply yards of Dagget, Route 66 continues deeper into the Mojave Desert, toward one of California's most important migration checkpoints. Every vehicle entering the state along this corridor was required to stop for inspection, not for customs or security, but to check agricultural goods for pests and invasive species. During the Dust Bowl years, it became a literal gate between hardship and hope, where officials could turn families around and send them back into the desert. The site later appeared in the film adaptation of The Grapes of Wrath, turning this quiet facility into a widely recognised symbol of California's guarded welcome. It closed when the interstate bypassed the old road, and the fenced, sun-bleached compound has sat there ever since, with inspection booths and buildings still standing. Out past Albuquerque, the road runs through a quiet stop called Thoreau. Once a busy midpoint between Gallup and Grants, it supported cafes, garages, and small motels catering to drivers crossing a long, flat stretch of desert. When the interstate redirected traffic, it didn't collapse all at once. Activity thinned gradually until each business closed and no replacements came. What's left is a kind of frozen decay, gas stations still holding their pumps, doors hanging open, paint stripped away by constant desert wind. Freight trains continue to pass through, shaking the empty buildings with regular force. Constant motion overhead, but no economic life left below. The schoolhouse and water tower still stand beneath the open sky, neither restored nor removed, simply left in place, as the town emptied too slowly to clear. Following the road into Foss, another highway town appears, one that lost its traffic, kept its buildings, and never quite found a next chapter. It began as a modest service stop on the Western Plains, but when Interstate 40 rerouted traffic, the town lost the flow of cars that had been its entire economy and had no reason to continue. What's left today is a quiet decay, weathered storefronts fading into the prairie, the kind of disappearance that happens slowly enough to go unnoticed. Located in tornado country, Foss has also suffered repeated storm damage, where empty and occupied buildings alike are struck without distinction and often never repaired. From a barely visible point on the map, the road continues toward a town that once had bigger ambitions. Vega was built wide and proud until the interstate arrived and changed everything. Back when every traveller crossing the Texas Panhandle passed through here, Vega called itself the crossroads of the nation, positioned where highways fed movement in every direction. The old Magnolia station still captures that period perfectly. Fuel pumps below, living quarters above, and a barbershop attached to the side. 3 separate businesses operating beneath one roof. Nearby, a small roadside shed houses relics from a long-time meat locker company. Highway memorabilia, vintage radios, and old chairs stacked wall to wall. A motel, city hall, and several aging storefronts continue to line the main strip, weathered, quiet, and fully exposed to the plains. Out front, a tree stands completely covered in cowboy boots nailed there by locals over the years. Nobody knows exactly when it began. Nobody seems interested in ending it. Vega at least has a boot tree and a barbershop story. Further west, San Fidel is quieter, emptier, and considerably less fun. Here, the road cuts straight through the remains of a small adobe settlement that never fully recovered from being bypassed. The faded Whiting Brothers station still stands, red lettering worn by sun, pump bays intact, preserved almost exactly as they were built. Whiting Brothers once operated one of the largest roadside networks in the southwest, stretching gas stations, motels, cafes, and repair stops across hundreds of miles of Route 66. When the interstate arrived, that system unravelled quickly, not gradually, but abruptly, as if the road itself erased it mid-sentence. It held on longer than most. An old cafe still retains its original glass, now clouded by decades of dust, while a church complex above the hill continues to overlook the old road below. At the same time, Depew followed a similar arc. Oil money, railroad confidence, a full main street, and still ended up in the same quiet aftermath. One key distinction sets it apart. It became the first town on Route 66 to be bypassed through a formal highway realignment. The original route once made a tight U-turn through downtown, forcing traffic onto streets never built for it, until engineers carved a straighter bypass just beyond the settlement. With the shift in traffic, commerce followed the road, while the town itself remained behind. Ghost signs still cling to brick walls overhead, faded but readable traces of businesses that closed generations ago. The buildings remain in surprisingly good condition. Nothing collapsed, the town simply emptied, which somehow makes the silence feel more complete. All that quiet eventually narrows down to Cool Springs, a single stone gas station parked in a basin of desert rock. It marked the last stop before Sitgreaves Pass, a mountain stretch locals call Bloody 66, for reasons that become obvious halfway up the climb. The original station opened in the late 1920s with a cafe and a line of tourist cabins, until a fire in the 1960s reduced the entire property to foundations. Years later, a film crew rebuilt the site from old photographs for an explosion scene, so Cool Springs was destroyed twice, once by accident, once on purpose. A real estate broker later passed the ruins while on vacation, stopped, and chose to restore the station for real, not a sentence many gas stations ever get. It now operates as a small gift shop and museum at the base of the pass, still facing the same dangerous road that gave the route its reputation. Some towns on the Texas Panhandle got bypassed overnight. Alan Reed took the slower route, shrinking lot by lot until the empty ground began overtaking the town itself. Over time, the settlement cycled through an unusual number of names: Springtown, Springtank, Prairie Dog Town, Rusty Shanks, and somehow Gouge Eye. At its peak, Alan Reed developed into a full roadside stop, with a school, church, cotton gin, and enough fuel stations to serve streams of traffic crossing the Texas plains. One restored 1930s, filling station still remains from that period, painted in faded yellow and red, and looking permanently ready for a Model T that never appears. When Interstate 40 redirected the traffic elsewhere, the community didn't collapse outright. It simply grew thinner year after year. Aging garages, empty concrete pads, and scattered storefronts continue to occupy the gaps, surrounded by a level of silence that makes it difficult to picture long lines of passing cars. Out in the Mojave, the old road passes through a strange little settlement that once made national television for being the loneliest town in America. Essex began not as a town, but as a railroad watermarker. The Santa Fe Railway placed desert stops in alphabetical sequence, and this site simply fell into place. Even so, its position made it vital. For miles in every direction there was nothing. No water, no repair stops, no shelter for travellers crossing the desert. What grew there was a modest but important waypoint. A garage, cafe, post office, cabins, and a free well that served anyone passing through the Mojave. Its isolation defined daily life. For decades, surrounding terrain blocked television signals so completely that children reportedly grew up without access to broadcast media. Now the garage is fenced off, the cabins continue to deteriorate, and the old well still stands by the roadside, obsolete but not entirely gone. Further west, Tucumcari still glows at night, neon over abandoned motels, illuminated signs above locked doors, a town dressed for guests who stopped arriving long ago. At its peak, more than 2,000 motel rooms glowed at night, with cursive script, flying arrows and coloured bulbs that turned the desert into something out of a movie. The Blue Swallow Motel still has the same swallow-shaped sign that has been lighting up since the early 40s, and locals will swear it never really goes off. There's a giant neon sombrero glowing over one restaurant, a camel sign over another, and a teepee curio shop whose teepee somehow looks even better at midnight than during the day. Its name comes from a Comanche word that locals say means lookout point, and once you see how the road lays open in both directions from here, the name makes perfect sense. What's wild is that even with all the abandoned motels along the edges, Tucumcari is still flickering, still humming, still trying to be exactly what it was the day Route 66 was finished. It's not a ghost town. It's a town that refuses to let its ghosts win. East into Bridgeport, none of the neon survives. Only weathered service buildings and roadside traces left where the highway once met the Canadian River. Before permanent bridges existed, crossing here was unpredictable. Water levels shifted constantly, sometimes moving the usable route without warning. Early motorists had to judge conditions carefully because heavy rain upstream could make the river impassable long before they ever reached it. That uncertainty created opportunity. Garages, repair shops, and roadside businesses gathered around the crossing to serve travellers waiting, repairing vehicles or preparing to continue west. As newer bridges opened elsewhere and traffic bypassed the area, the local economy slowly drained away with it. Fragments of that earlier corridor still line the original route. Skeletal storefronts, empty lots, and structures that remained standing long after their usefulness disappeared. Far out on the Arizona plain stands one of the strangest structures ever built beside a highway. A giant geodesic dome dropped into the middle of nowhere. Meteor City was never truly a city at all. It began as a roadside trading post whose owners understood that on a flat, empty stretch of desert, visibility was everything. Even before the famous dome appeared, the business relied on spectacle, first operating beneath an enormous tent before escalating into something even more surreal. With no hills, trees, or nearby development to compete with, the geodesic structure rose from the desert, like something from another planet, visible for miles. The approach worked. Drivers stopped simply to understand what they were seeing, then left with souvenirs, jewellery, and Route 66 memorabilia. Unlike towns built around rivers, railroads, or mining, Meteor City depended almost entirely on curiosity, architecture bold enough to invent its own destination. Back in Texas, McLean follows a quieter formula. A gas station, convenience store, weathered garages, and a traditional downtown that secured its place without spectacle. It became one of the earliest towns in the Texas Panhandle to receive a paved highway, drawing steady traffic before most nearby settlements had fully adjusted to the new era. The Phillips 66 station stands as one of the best preserved along the entire route, restored to its original configuration, down to canopy angles and pump placement. Another landmark is a small barbed wire museum along the old alignment, dedicated entirely to fencing wire. The town also carries a lesser-known wartime layer when German prisoners of war were held nearby during World War II and assigned to work on surrounding farms. At the other end of the spectrum, Chambliss is a scatter of worn cabins and closed buildings in the open desert, where surviving the drive was once reason enough to stop. Mojave summers were brutal enough to boil radiator fluid, blow out tyres, and strand families on a road with no shade and no help for miles. Between the longer empty stretches, Chambliss was it, the one dot on the map where a driver could get gas, eat something, and close their eyes before the desert started again. The cabins are still here, faded to the colour of the desert around them. Windows gone, doors open to the wind. What's crazy is how little has changed. Same flat expanse, same brutal sun, same silence that once made pulling off here feel like a genuine act of survival. In New Mexico, Budville offers something different, a family-run tavern and lodging stop that was never fully modernised, and a roadside murder that was never fully solved. Not every successful stop became a neon strip. It ran on something simpler, a bar, a few cabins, and the kind of hospitality that kept travellers returning without a single billboard. The same family operated the trading post and tavern for decades, built on one straightforward reputation, always open when the road got long and the options ran out. Then one night, the owner was shot inside his own tavern, investigated, discussed, and never officially resolved. The bar still stands, largely untouched, which makes it one of the more unintentionally preserved stops on this stretch of highway. Stops like Budville rarely made the travel guides. They just filled the gaps between famous towns, running on family labour and word of mouth long after bigger operators had moved on. Going east, Afton's claim was simpler. A small gas station, a collection of classic cars, and a town that briefly shone because of both. The station wasn't just a fuel stop. It was packed wall to wall with polished vintage cars. It turned a routine pull-off into something worth slowing down for. Beyond the cars, the main road is lined with abandoned grocery buildings, ghost motel shells, and silent storefronts that once formed a working commercial strip. It sat in the middle of cattle and railroad country, prosperous enough to build a proper main street, dependent enough on passing traffic that when the traffic thinned, the street went with it. What's left has a particular stillness, not collapsed, not restored, just frozen somewhere between the two, wearing decades of weather without much complaint. Over in Hackberry, the highway left its mark differently. Less a town now, more a collection of everything the road ever left behind. The Hackberry General Store is one of the most photographed buildings on the entire Mother Road. Old fuel pumps out front, rusted Coca-Cola signs covering the walls, a Corvette parked outside, and license plates on every surface that isn't already taken. The man who saved it was a wandering cartoonist who lived out of a Volkswagen bus, painted detailed Route 66 maps from memory, and gave his art away for free. He treated the store the same way he treated the road, as something worth preserving exactly as it was, without cleaning it up or making it more convenient for anyone. Walk inside today, and it feels less like a shop and more like the inside of someone's very specific mind. Packed, deliberate, and slightly overwhelming in the best possible way. The surroundings add to it. Rusting vehicles at odd angles, weathered signs leaning against walls, fragments of roadside commerce never thrown out, and somehow becoming the whole point. Texas has its own answer to Hackberry. A single gas station in Shamrock so well preserved it stops traffic, anchoring a town that's still negotiating everything around it. The design reportedly began as a sketch drawn into the dirt outside a motor court by a cafe owner with no architectural training who wanted a building. Drivers would never forget. What emerged was a pair of flared towers, green and gold glazed tiles, and a tulip-shaped crown, distinctive enough to earn the nickname the Taj Mahal of Texas. The restored Magnolia Station became Shamrock's postcard image, though beyond it stretches a harsher reality. Aging motel rows, underused storefronts, and fading highway architecture left off the restoration list. It feels like a town with one perfectly restored landmark and an uncertain future surrounding it, which somehow makes it more believable than many places along this road. In the desert, Ludlow once ran the same operation on a harsher route. A full-service settlement built where water and shelter were scarce, now reduced to commercial shells. The settlement began as a railroad water stop, a functional point on the map created to keep steam engines moving across one of the driest crossings in the southwest. Out here, water alone could determine whether trains completed the journey, giving Ludlow an importance far larger than its size suggested. The Santa Fe Railroad later added Harvey House facilities, known for providing dependable meals and clean lodging to passengers crossing otherwise unforgiving terrain. When the highway era arrived, cafes, garages, and motor lodgings clustered around the rail corridor, allowing the town to serve automobiles and trains simultaneously. That balance disappeared once the interstate bypassed the area. Storefronts still stand, traces of the rail line remain visible, but the traffic that once sustained both now passes by without slowing down. Newkirk never had a Harvey House or a railroad empire. It had service stations, storefronts, and homes. And when the traffic disappeared, most of them remained exactly where they stood. The town sits on the high plains of eastern New Mexico, where hard winds and enormous skies seem to slow the process of disappearance itself. During Route 66's busiest years, every gas station and roadside cafe along this corridor carried real importance because travellers crossing the open plains had few alternatives. When the interstate bypassed Newkirk, the town was simply ignored, leaving behind one of the old route's most intact collections of mid-century roadside architecture. Church buildings still rise above the strip as well, evidence that the community lasted long enough to leave more than a commercial footprint behind. Today, photographers and road trip enthusiasts travel long distances just to walk through it, drawn less by restoration than by the rare feeling that almost nothing has been altered. That same pull toward living history continues east into Bristow, where brick storefronts and motor-era buildings still reveal how prosperous this highway once made central Oklahoma. Long before automobiles arrived, oil transformed Bristow, turning a quiet farming settlement into a booming commercial centre almost overnight. The brick architecture carried its own message. Towns that built in brick intended permanence, and Bristow covered block after block with that confidence. As the highway era expanded westward, the town adapted easily, exchanging oil-field business for cross-country motorists needing fuel, meals, and overnight lodging. That combination of oil wealth and highway commerce left behind an unusually dense collection of surviving commercial buildings for a town of its size. A local saying claims downtown survived because nobody had enough money to demolish it, preservation by poverty, as some residents half-jokingly call it. Farther west in Arizona, communities tried a different survival tactic. Giant concrete teepees and roadside oddities meant to stop drivers instantly, like the Geronimo trading post. Those concrete teepees were calculated. A driver doing 60 miles per hour needs something weird in their sightline to actually slow down and pull over. The trading post also leaned hard into the name Geronimo, one of the most recognised names in American history, because recognition meant traffic, and traffic meant sales. Inside, the shelves were stacked with turquoise jewellery, painted pottery, and novelty items that were sold to families looking for proof they'd been somewhere. The concrete teepees are still standing today, holding their shape in the dry Arizona air, far better than most of the diners and motels that once surrounded them. Not every town on the old road tried to dazzle its way to survival. Levelland didn't, and its abandoned gas stations and empty storefronts show how that played out. The name itself is just accurate. It sits on the Texas High Plains, terrain so flat that early surveyors struggled to establish reliable reference points. Its economy rested on cotton and passing traffic, but when cheaper regions undercut cotton and the interstate rerouted vehicles, both collapsed at once. A preserved school building still stands intact among the quieter blocks, flanked by the skeletal frames of old filling stations, whose pump islands are still visible from the road. The region also lies within one of the most tornado-prone corridors in the United States, where severe weather is treated less as an exception and more as routine. Here there's a dry local saying that you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. The land is that flat and the silence is that complete. West in California, Baghdad once solved a very specific problem. How do you keep drivers alive crossing the Mojave? It had fuel, food, and shelter. Then it had nothing. The surrounding desert is one of the driest in the country, where roadside stops weren't convenience but survival. Places to refuel, recover, and avoid becoming stranded. Baghdad's cafe became a quiet landmark for cross-country travellers. The last stop before miles of empty desert, where strangers shared tables simply because there were no others ahead. When the interstate bypassed the settlement, traffic didn't taper off. It vanished, and with it the need for every business that depended on it. A concrete slab, a few scattered foundations, and a rusting water tank are about the only things left to suggest Baghdad was ever there at all. Meanwhile, Montoya never reached even that stage. No removal, no legend, just a railroad settlement that slowly emptied and stayed that way. It was built entirely around the railroad, which meant the moment train traffic declined, the town had no backup plan and no secondary economy to fall back on. What's left sits on the plains much as it was left. Intact roofs over empty houses, a crumbling church still standing, and utility poles lining a road few still drive. That church is the strangest detail. The town once had enough people for a place of worship. The emptying wasn't always gradual. At some point, this was a real community. No disaster, no fire, no single dramatic event explains Montoya. It just became unnecessary, which in some ways is a harder thing to explain than a catastrophe. Chelsea at least tried. It kept its brick storefronts standing, started a few restoration projects, and then sort of ran out of momentum halfway through. It also sits on one of the oldest officially designated sections of the original highway corridor in Oklahoma, where the pavement predates much of what surrounds it today. The brick commercial strip rose during a genuine boom period, fueled by nearby oil activity and steady cross-country traffic that made downtown investment worthwhile. When that traffic shifted elsewhere, the town didn't collapse outright. It slowly transitioned into a place where more buildings sit unused than occupied. Some storefronts are patched up, new windows, cleaned facades, but commercial life never returns and the main street feels staged, as if waiting for activity that never resumes. Out in Arizona, Valentine is stripped down to something simpler: a gas station, a few homes, and a long desert corridor that stopped expecting movement long ago. Set within Hualapai Valley, the settlement lies on land belonging to the Hualapai Nation, where the old highway cuts directly through sovereign territory. That geography once shaped its role. Traffic included not only travellers, but ranch workers, traders, and tribal residents moving between scattered desert communities. The name has no romantic origin. Valentine was named after the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, and the Valentine's Day mail tradition came later by coincidence. A weathered trading post shell, a shuttered gas station, and a handful of occupied homes are about all that mark Valentine as a place still technically on the map. Where it faded quietly, commerce built something noisier. A mining town that doubled as a highway service hub, with early filling stations still standing to prove it meant business. That wealth supported proper commercial blocks and kept roadside services active, tying the town directly into both extractive industry and highway traffic. One surviving example is Allen's Conoco filling station, a small brick structure so compact it earned the nickname Hole in the Wall, a name that persisted long after the pump stopped running. It's now a preserved landmark and popular photo stop, rather than a working fuel station. The mining era left behind more than architecture. Waste piles and contaminated ground still mark the edges of town, forming a visible record of how intensely the land was worked. Commerce also carries an unexpected cultural footnote. It was the hometown of a major baseball figure, drawing a different kind of attention to a place otherwise defined by industry and dust. Then Siberia, California, strips loneliness down even further. Abandoned walls, crumbling outbuildings, railroad tracks, open desert. That's the town. That's all it's ever been. The name came from irony. Residents reportedly chose Siberia because the desert heat felt so brutally opposite to the frozen image the word suggested. Even at its peak, the place amounted to little more than a gas station, a store, and a few homes pressed into the dirt, which makes the sparse remains feel strangely fitting. There are no major signs pointing toward it, and almost nothing visible from a distance. You have to know exactly where to look, and even then it's easy to miss. Freight trains still pass straight through the area, the railroad continuing uninterrupted, while the settlement beside it gradually dissolves back into the desert. Out on the plains, ND once supported ranchers, travellers, and a working schoolhouse. Now it holds grassland, isolated structures, and a very long silence. The name came from the old ND Ranch, the cattle brand local ranchers used. The town was literally named after a livestock mark. At its busiest, ND had a hotel, a store, a schoolhouse, and enough activity to keep a small community functioning. A weather-beaten motel still stands beside the old highway, its sign advertising modern restrooms, a promise that expired decades ago. The schoolhouse has collapsed, homes are settling into the prairie, and wind pushes dust across vacant lots in long, slow sweeps. Not every town faded this completely. Arcadia had the good sense to build a very photogenic red barn, which turns out to be an excellent long-term survival strategy. A local farmer built the barn round, soaking bur oak boards in the river and bending them into a circle, convinced that a tornado would slide around a curved building rather than tear through it. That theory has never been fully tested. The barn is still standing, so nobody is arguing. Inside, the loft carries sound in strange ways. Voices travel cleanly beneath the curved ceiling, and locals once held dances there, partly because fiddles echoed so sharply through the space. Years later, the roof collapsed shortly after a preservation group acquired the property, timing that could generously be described as unfortunate. Right beside it now stands a giant illuminated soda bottle, glowing at night in shifting colours, because America loves nothing more than placing something completely ridiculous next to something completely irreplaceable. In the eastern Arizona desert sits a strange, quiet ruin that looks like the world's saddest movie set. This is Fort Courage, a fake frontier fort built to cash in on a TV western that wasn't even filmed nearby, created so travellers could step inside a version of the show made real. Owners added a gift shop, a gas station, and a pancake house with a 16-sided windmill roof, betting families would stop for breakfast beneath painted cowboy murals and staged frontier scenery. For a while it worked. Busloads of visitors posed beside the wooden stockade walls. Until the show faded, the crowds disappeared, and the highway shifted just far enough away to make stopping unnecessary. The pancake house closed, the stockade began to sag, and the attraction slowly transformed into the very thing it had once imitated, an actual ghost town. Now graffiti covers the bunkhouses and fences, layering fresh vandalism over a place already built on imitation and performance. Needles keeps things harsher and more immediate. A still-living desert town where old motor courts and cafes endure in one of the hottest, driest regions in the country. It sits on the Colorado River, though the surrounding desert records some of the highest temperatures in the country. The water is there, the relief isn't. The town got its name from jagged rock formations visible across the river, sharp peaks that early surveyors found impossible to call anything other than what they obviously looked like. The old Harvey House depot survives, a sign that Needles was once important enough to deserve proper railroad hospitality in the middle of a punishing desert crossing. Neon signs on the old motor court still flicker, the cafes still serve coffee, and the heat still arrives every summer like it has something to prove. East into Baxter Springs, all of that gives way to something older. Aging garages and mining-era buildings, beside a corridor that carried commerce long before automobiles arrived. Kansas only claims a short section of Route 66, but it had already become a major shipping hub decades before the highway received its famous name. The ground beneath this region held lead and zinc, and for years the town existed to move ore outward, first by wagon and rail, then by truck, along the route that became the Mother Road. That industrial foundation made the transition into the automobile era almost effortless. The infrastructure already existed, only the machinery passing through changed. A preserved visitor centre anchors the historic district, but beyond it sit weathered repair shops, vacant lots and fading commercial shells from the town's lessee. Farther west, Santa Rosa remains active, though the old alignment is lined with abandoned cafes, silent filling stations, and boarded motels left behind by the interstate. Both versions of the town exist side by side, the newer commercial centre still moving, the older corridor nearly frozen beneath faded signs, vacant lots and plywood-covered windows. What ultimately kept the place alive had nothing to do with the highway. Beneath the desert sits the Blue Hole, a perfectly circular artesian pool forcing thousands of gallons of crystal clear water upward every minute. Divers travel from across the country to swim in it, giving Santa Rosa an identity built on geology rather than traffic. Along the former strip, vintage motel signs still hold their original colours and typography, creating an accidental open-air gallery of mid-century roadside design. Santa Rosa survived because of what lay underground. Galena had to get creative with what it already had. Rusting stations, old brick, and a mining past it turned into a reason to visit. For decades, this was one of the country's most productive lead and zinc mining towns. When the ore ran out, it left empty buildings, abandoned equipment, and an uncertain future. The answer was surprisingly simple. Leave it standing. Let the decay become the attraction. One restored tow truck here inspired a character in the animated film Cars, and that single piece of trivia now pulls more visitors than the mining history ever managed. There's a darker side too. The surrounding ground was worked so heavily that sections of it are still considered contaminated. A quieter chapter sitting just beneath all the nostalgia. Some storefronts are restored, others are still slowly coming apart. Galena never fully resolved that split, and somehow never needed to. Across the border into Missouri, Spencer Station goes back even further. A pre-war service complex built before neon signs and motor courts reshaped the road. Missouri was among the first to fully pave its section of the route, making it an early proving ground for long-distance travel when most American roads were still dirt. At the time, roadside businesses were purely functional stops for fuel, repairs, and brief rest. Before the rise of chain motels and branded diners, the roadside economy was built on independent garages, small, owner-run operations with little more than a pump, basic tools, and necessity. Spencer Station reflects that era. Modest, practical, and focused on keeping vehicles moving rather than drawing attention. Farther west, Yucca saw the railroad, highway and interstate all pass through in sequence and still end up left behind. The railroad came first, cutting through the Mojave Desert to move ore out of the surrounding mining country. For a while, that was enough. When the highway arrived, Yucca picked up a second purpose: fuel, water, and a brief stop for drivers crossing one of the most punishing desert stretches in the American Southwest. The ground around town was also actively mined for gold and silver, leaving behind abandoned shafts and rusting equipment the desert has been quietly swallowing ever since. When the interstate bypassed the corridor, both economies collapsed at once. No freight stop, no passing traffic, nothing left to hold the settlement together. Illinois had a different idea. Just south of Bloomington, Towanda kept its original pavement intact, one of the oldest drivable stretches still out there. Unlike most preserved segments that are fenced off for display, this one is still part of the road network. Traffic continues to run over the same surface. Early motorists once used decades ago. The scale feels immediately different. The lane is narrow by modern standards, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass, revealing how compact early highway design once was. Along the corridor, remaining roadside structures still reflect pre-war construction. Low profiles, small footprints, and a focus on utility over visibility. Illinois served as the eastern gateway to Route 66, and towns like Towanda were never built for spectacle, only for function, surviving long enough for their simplicity to become notable. Avila, though, represents a harsher outcome. A rural settlement so diminished that it is often labelled a ghost town, despite a handful of residents still remaining. It once supported a school, church, hotel, and enough commerce to sustain nearby farming communities. Then the highway shifted, rail traffic faded, and the population slowly thinned out. Locals now call it the Capital 66 Ghost Town, not because it vanished suddenly, but because the decline happened so quietly that many people barely noticed it happening at all. One of the town's best-known landmarks, a Phillips 66 station from the main road, was eventually lifted from its foundation and moved to a recreated ghost town farther up the highway. An old schoolhouse, a quiet cemetery, and the leaning bones of a town square are all that's left. On a hot afternoon, the only sound is wind through dry grass. West into Arizona, Truxton tells a familiar story, with a twist. This town was supposed to be the next big thing, until the interstate left its motels empty in the desert. The geography made it matter. It sits in a broad valley flanked by mountain ridges, and drivers crossing deeper needed fuel and a bed before tackling what came next. Those passes were genuinely punishing. Steep grades, sharp curves, and summer heat that pushed early engines past their limits on a regular basis. For many drivers, Truxton wasn't a choice. It was the last reasonable stop to check the car, fill the tank and sleep before committing to the high desert beyond. When the interstate bypassed the valley, Truxton lost its purpose almost overnight. The buildings stayed, the guests didn't. Not every town needed a dramatic collapse to become interesting. Odell kept its old roadside bones, did very little else, and somehow that turned out to be enough. The Star here is a standard oil station, built in the early 30s, designed to look like a cosy cottage, so drivers would feel comfortable, pulling in rather than passing through. At its peak, competing stations crowded this short corridor, chasing the same customers, and the cottage station added 2 extra service bays to keep up. Traffic was once so heavy that the town built an underground pedestrian tunnel, so children and churchgoers could cross the road without getting run over. The tunnel was eventually filled in. The cottage station wasn't, restored by the village. It now looks almost exactly as it did on opening day. Its name Odell, oddly enough, comes from Old English words meaning something close to Blue Dye Hill, a small, useless piece of beauty for a farming town in flat central Illinois. Plano carries none of that polish, just abandoned sandstone buildings, crumbling storefronts, and the quiet atmosphere of an Ozark community the road quietly forgot. Blink while driving through, and you'll miss it entirely. 2 structures are all that's left: the ruins of a stone general store and a former gas station someone converted into a private home. It once had a main street, a hotel, farmers, travellers, and just enough life to hold together. After World War II, it quietly fell apart, the buildings sinking deeper into the trees ever since. The old store walls still stand, but the roof opens straight to the sky. Vines push through the broken windows like the Ozarks are slowly reclaiming the interior, one crack at a time. There are no signs marking Plano, no plaques, no museum. You just have to know it's there, and once you do, it's hard to unsee how completely the forest absorbs everything left behind. Out in California, rice represents an even deeper form of erasure. A Mojave settlement reduced to scattered foundations and isolated walls that the desert has slowly reclaimed. It began as a railroad water stop, built for a single purpose, supplying steam engines crossing one of the driest corridors in the American Southwest. When diesel replaced steam, that original purpose vanished almost overnight, and without another role to replace it, the settlement quickly fell out of use. Rice is far from unique. Across the Mojave, settlements rose on a single lifeline, rail, water, or highway, and fell to foundations and fence posts once it vanished. Today, the site exists in near total quiet. No roads converge here, no signage remains, and no activity interrupts the flat expanse of desert except passing freight trains that no longer stop. West of here, Paris Springs is the opposite outcome. A Depression-era stop, preserved just before it vanished, anchored by a Sinclair station and cobblestone structures that barely survived. It once operated as a fully self-contained roadside hub, where fuel, food, lodging, and mechanical services existed within a single compact cluster of buildings. At its peak, everything a driver needed was concentrated in one place, supporting steady traffic moving through the Missouri corridor under very different road conditions. The Sinclair station remains its most recognisable landmark, a carefully restored green and white structure from the 1930s, sitting beside vintage vehicles that appear frozen in time. Nearby, a cobblestone barn built from riverstone stands as another surviving structure, constructed at a time when durable materials had to be sourced and shaped by hand. What preserved the site was not a formal programme or public funding, but the decision of a single owner to maintain it, while other stops along the corridor gradually vanished. In contrast, Edgewood shows a different trajectory, where preservation never happened, and only fragments of a trading post survive beneath expanding suburban development. It occupies a key position between the Sandia Mountains and the Eastern Plains, where drivers pause while climbing out of Albuquerque or descending into it. The trading post here was a one-stop shop, fuel, snacks and locally sourced goods all under the same roof, practical, unpolished, and exactly what drivers crossing this stretch needed. Edgewood didn't fade, it got swallowed. Growth built over the old traveller corridor, stranding roadside structures between housing developments and chain stores. The old alignment still runs parallel to the newer road like a shadow. Same direction, same destination, completely ignored by the traffic moving alongside it. Missouri had its own version of this. Phelps wasn't swallowed by sprawl. It simply ran out of reasons to stay busy, and the old filling stations still prove it. At its peak, it had a hotel, general store, cafe, and enough fuel stops to keep drivers moving through the Ozarks. For a town this small, it was a full economy. A gas station from the mid-20s still has its original pumps out front. Not restored, not maintained, just left exactly where they were. The old schoolhouse is still standing too, sun-bleached and silent, looking almost too small to have held actual classes. It did, for decades. This stop was critical. Early engines overheated, tyres failed without warning, and an outpost could mean the difference between reaching your destination and being stranded in the dark. Into Ed's camp, the road tightens into a final desert choke point. Cabins and fuel positioned at the base of a steep ascent before the most difficult stretch of the entire route. Above it, Sitgreaves Pass rises in a series of sharp switchbacks, one of the most demanding sections of roadway in the American Southwest, where early vehicles were pushed to their mechanical limits. For drivers, stopping here was not optional. The climb ahead could overwhelm engines, overheat radiators, and leave vehicles stranded on narrow bends far from assistance. Ed's camp existed to bridge that gap. It provided fuel, water, cabins, and basic repairs. A minimal system designed solely to get travellers safely across the pass. What's left are scattered foundations, rusted equipment, and a few cabin outlines slowly being reclaimed by desert vegetation, easy to overlook without knowing what once depended on it. The road over the pass was eventually abandoned for modern traffic, deemed too steep and hazardous for continued use. Hundreds of miles away in the Ozarks, rescue never faced such extremes. Its cabins simply aged gradually, without terrain or urgency shaping their decline. It reflects the cabin court era, when drivers stayed in small roadside cottages built for little more than a bed and basic needs. Built from local stone and timber, they reflect typical roadside construction in the region. Modest, hand-built, and meant to be temporary, though many lasted far longer than expected. The rise of motel chains with standardised rooms, indoor plumbing and air conditioning ended the cabin court model almost immediately, leaving the small cottages without a purpose. Garage structures and roadside fragments now draw photographers and historians, unpolished, unmaintained, and slowly returning to the Ozarks. Rescue offered shelter in the hills. Funk's Grove offered something gentler. Maple woods, soft terrain, and a rural road that feels less like a highway and more like private land. The Funk family has tapped maple trees here since before the Civil War. The operation predates the highway by decades and never needed it to survive. When the road came through, it passed directly beside the grove. Travellers began stopping to buy syrup, and the farm quietly added a roadside stand without changing anything else. It never transformed into a tourist trap. No neon signs, no gift shop expansion, no attempt to capitalise beyond selling the syrup they were already making. Illinois farmland shaped the early road, and Funk's Grove is one of the few places where that agricultural atmosphere survives intact. Unhurried, undeveloped, unbothered. Not every stop had maples and fall colours. Arlington was all river, a small Ozark settlement that existed because the road crossed the Gasconade, and someone had to be there when it did. At its busiest, it had a riverside lodge, a resort, and enough warm weather traffic to keep things going through the season. Modest, but real. The old road through here featured a steep climb that terrified drivers in early cars. A hill modern vehicles barely notice, but once pushed underpowered engines to their absolute limit. When the highway shifted to a faster, straighter route, Arlington was largely left behind. The resort closed, traffic vanished, and only weathered buildings and an old roadbed survive. California's Goffs had a busier resume. Railroad stop, mining camp, military staging point, highway community. The desert just kept finding new uses for the same spot. Out in the bare Mojave stands a beautifully restored little schoolhouse, all stucco and arches, looking weirdly elegant against the emptiness. Goff's was briefly on Route 66 until a faster, straighter alignment was built nearby and the road simply skipped past. The school closed, families drifted away, and the town nearly vanished. During the Second World War, the schoolhouse became a cafe for soldiers training under General Patton. One more temporary identity before that too ended. Preservationists fully restored it in the late 90s. The general store burned down a few years ago, but the schoolhouse still operates as a small museum. Fewer than 30 residents live here now, yet they still call themselves the desert tortoise capital of the world, possibly the most committed civic identity in America. The trains still pass through. They always did. Meanwhile, Hooker is running out of reasons to stay on the map. Just a fading stop the highway no longer needs. What makes people pause is the name on old roadside signs, once tied to brief fame that sustained a small cafe and gas stop, until shifting routes left it behind. At its peak roadside novelty, a giant cartoon mule in overalls stood by the highway, tipping its hat like a frozen greeter, welcoming every passing car. Today, that figure is gone, and the town has slipped into near ghost status, where the Hooker-cut rock walls, the old road alignment, and the quiet Hooker Cemetery do most of the talking. And as the miles roll forward, the ease of travel begins to unravel, pointing straight toward the unforgiving Jericho Gap in Texas. Here, a simple stretch of road could turn into thick, glue-like mud after a storm, gripping tyres so tightly that even strong engines gave up. Cars didn't just slow down, they sank, leaving wheels spinning helplessly, while travellers stepped out into ankle-high muck that pulled at every move. Before long, the gap became a trap, where lines of stranded vehicles spread across the prairie, and people waited hours, sometimes days, for the ground to dry. The struggle here was only the beginning, as the route pressed on toward a town where the ground itself would become the reason people had to leave. Times Beach began as a cheerful riverside community where families bought small plots through a newspaper offer and built quiet lives along dusty roads. That dust became deadly when oil sprayed to keep it down, carried a hidden poison, coating streets in a strange substance no one realised could harm them. Soon animals began to die, and children unknowingly played in the contaminated dirt, turning everyday life into something quietly dangerous. Then came a powerful flood, spreading the toxin even farther, just as officials confirmed the truth, forcing residents to abandon their homes almost overnight. What followed was something almost unheard of. Every house torn down, every inch of soil removed, until the town itself was erased from the map. This is Route 66, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of New Mexico, check out this video.